For some people, moving to France seems like a dream, but a lot of people who actually do it end up regretting it sooner or later. I am French and I used to live in the US before I moved back to Paris, so I totally understand the appeal of moving to France. Like, the food is delicious, our cities are beautiful, there's culture everywhere, and we do have good public services and free healthcare. When people first arrive to France, everything is new and feels like an adventure. And I have to say that moving back to Paris, I also had a lot of fun trying all the delicious food, doing a lot of fun stuff around the city, and just rediscovering all the positive things. But you know, this honeymoon phase doesn't last. You actually get used to the good stuff. Like, after the 10th day eating a delicious croissant, you actually take it for granted. And that's when real life actually sets in and you start noticing all the annoying things. And that's when some people who move to France start to really hate it. And I personally see two main reasons why this happens. The first one is that a lot of frustration with France and the city of Paris in particular can actually come from people having the wrong expectations. I talk a lot about it on this channel, but France and Paris are not portrayed in a way that's realistic in the movies. Like, if you move to Paris, chances are that you're not gonna live in a place that looks like this, but more realistically in a place that looks like this, which is just a normal suburb of Paris, or even like this, which is very common if you live in a car-dependent suburb that's a bit further away. And that's not bad, it's just normal life. Not every single place is beautiful here in France. And I can tell you that if you move to France, obviously the common annoyances of living in a big city are gonna be there, plus some more that are actually specific to France, like strikes, bureaucracy, and many more that we will get into later. And that's actually when the real problem starts. When your idea of a place doesn't match the reality, it becomes so much harder to keep an open mind and just try to adapt to the culture. And I feel sometimes people have really strong feelings about it. Like, the actual difference between what people were expecting and the reality of France and the French culture makes people so angry sometimes. And I have to tell you that I've had real life experiences of meeting random people, you know, maybe friends of friends. And when I tell them I'm French, they tell me just that they hate France and that basically every French person sucks. And you know, obviously if you start your interactions with someone by insulting their culture, you're just not gonna be the best of friends with them. I'd say overall it's not a good strategy. But you know, I try to not stop to that and actually ask questions. And you know, my issue with these people is that they've only visited Paris, so there's so much more to the French culture. Like, we have an incredibly diverse culture that changes from region to region. And for them, you know, they visited Paris, they hated it. They just go back home with the idea that they dislike France, and that's the end of the story. For us, in this video is actually just the beginning, because we are gonna go deeper and we're gonna try to understand why this culture shock happens. And for that, I need to tell you about this concept called the cultural iceberg. And this is such a cool concept to understand a culture a bit deeper, because basically it's telling us that in every culture there's a tiny visible part that, for example, in France, it's like the architecture, the food and wine, the fashion, the culture, you know, all of this stuff that's easy to love about France. But this is only around 10% of the culture, and the other 90%, so the non-visible part of the iceberg, is actually deeper stuff like communication styles, different approaches to relationships, different values, and a lot of fun hidden stuff that you start to understand once you spend a lot of time in a culture. And we will get into exactly what that is for France right after this. But one thing I do feel is the visible part of our culture is very publicized. People know about French food, French architecture, the fashion, and so on. But people tend to not know at all about the deeper parts of our culture. And that's what often tends to make people surprised when they discover that there's actually so much more to the French culture than what they see in media. All right, an easy example is in France, you're raised with the deep belief that you have to say hello at the beginning of every single interaction. Like, when you're a little kid, that's one of the first things you learn. It's a way of acknowledging the other person as another human being just like you. Well, when I moved to the US, I actually was a bit surprised that people didn't start their interactions with saying hello. And I was a bit sad at first until I understood that it's not as much of a thing there, and there's other fun, friendly cultural norms like small talk. So what I'm saying here is that if you want to move past the culture shock, you have to keep an open mind, because things are gonna be different from your own culture. And most importantly, you have to move deeper and deeper down the iceberg, because understanding this deeper culture is actually, in my opinion, so rewarding and so much more fun than only the visible surface level things. And by the way, you could spend a lifetime going down the iceberg. Like, my My boyfriend Bobby's from the US, and I've been trying to do that for around the past 8 years, and I feel I still have so much to discover. And before we move forward, I wanted to tell you about today's sponsor, Viva. Viva is a sustainable, stylish, and comfy shoe brand, and for this video, they sent me their Eduarda boots, which are so warm and cozy and are really perfect for the bad weather we've been having in Paris, since they are made to be water repellent and they also retain heat. Also, Viva is really big on comfort, and one of their things is making heels that are as comfortable as sneakers. And to be honest, I almost never wear heels for this exact reason. Like, my feet hurt instantly when I wear heels, but the heels they send me are actually extremely comfortable because they have this padded insole that protects your feet, and I've actually been able to wear them for longer periods of time. Alright, so the last pair they sent me almost feels like I'm wearing slippers because they are so comfortable, and these are a perfect gift if you're traveling to Paris since you'll be walking so much. So if you want to try them, you can check out the Viva store in Paris or click the link in the description below and use my code for a discount. So the first thing that comes to mind is that when you move to a new place, it's like you're a child again and you have to learn all the basic stuff of everyday life a second time. So for example, in this TikTok, this girl who's an exchange student says that she had to learn to live without a dryer because we don't have dryers in France. It's not a very common thing. And instead she's learning how to hang her clothes on a line. And obviously she did it wrong the first time, so people are commenting with tips on how to do it right. And this might seem really small, but when you're moving to a different place, there's so many of those tiny things you can do wrong. I remember my first night after moving to the US, so I arrived really late at night and I wanted to take a shower. The shower looked like this, you know, with a shower head that's mounted on the wall, and I just didn't understand how to use it. I didn't understand that you have to pull on the faucet to actually have water come out of the shower head. My boyfriend Bobby wasn't there with me, so I had to actually ask my roommate, who I had never met before, to help me and demo the shower for me. And like, this type of small stuff is really a learning curve. Like, there's so much small stuff you have to learn that might seem super normal for a local. And in France, I feel that we don't have a culture of convenience like in the US, so there's a lot of small stuff in everyday life that can be frustrating to someone coming from a different country. And the biggest one is the world famous French bureaucracy. Opening a bank account is so hard. You need a ton of paperwork. Bobby, for example, was never able to actually do it. He went to the bank several times with all his paperwork, like the girl we see in this TikTok. But he gave up in the end because it was just easier to keep his American bank account and just have an international option to avoid the fees. And this is not the only thing that's hard. Like, visas are super hard to understand, obviously everywhere. Renting an apartment is so hard in France. You do need a bunch of paperwork, and it's so hard if you don't know a French person who can explain what the paperwork needed is. Also, it will be very hard if you're not a French taxpayer because they will ask for specific French tax documents that you don't need. But there's also random rules that are slightly inconvenient and that always surprise people who move to Paris. Like opening times, a lot of shops are closed on Sundays. My local post office closes at 12 on a Saturday, and I have to be honest with you, this is not a time where I'm ready to go out of the house and go to the post office at all. I'm in bed by this time. For whatever reason, and a lot of people have picked up on it, deliveries are so weird in France. Like in the US, it's so simple. They just drop it at your door and that's all. But in France, they never seem to find you. Like, they have to call you. If you're not here, they drop it somewhere else and you have to pick it up. And just learning the day-to-day stuff can be so hard, and I feel can be enough to break someone who's moving to Paris. But that's not the only thing that's hard in everyday life. If you are, for example, an American who moved to Paris and you are hoping to have a similar salary than in the US, well, you're in for a bit of a shock because salaries in France tend to be pretty low compared to the cost of living. Like, France, for example, is right above the EU average in terms of annual earnings, but it's towards the top in terms of cost of living. So basically, if you were hoping to make a lot of money, you should have moved to Switzerland, where the salaries are higher. All right, so this is my personal experience as someone who used to work a corporate job before. I used to work in investment banking and in tech. And in my personal opinion, I prefer the work culture in the US because you're given more responsibilities faster and you don't have to feel like you're waiting for your turn for a promotion. And the French work culture is something we could spend hours talking about because we do have a better work-life balance. Like, there's not this always-on culture that you have in the US where you have to be always available. Like, People do take their vacations. You cannot get anything done in August. But on the other hand, you're expected to put a lot of your personal self into your work life. Like you're expected to socialize a lot with colleagues. And I'm not always a fan of that because it revolves a lot around drinking. It's a very hierarchical work culture and it takes a lot of time to move up. And obviously this is a very personal point of view because it depends so much on the type of work you do, on your location, but just know that the work culture in France can be pretty unique. Plus, if you don't speak French, it's gonna be super hard to advance your career or feel fully integrated. Like the language barrier is a real thing and learning French is really tough. It's a hard language to learn, but it's the key to fitting in here because you'll get to know people so much deeper if you actually speak their language. And if you're just starting out, my best advice is just to go out and try speaking as much as you can. Don't stress if it's not perfect, and also sometimes people will switch to English just to be nice. I personally do that all the time, but just stay strong, keep speaking French, and just tell people you're trying to practice. People will reappreciate it, and also it will help you connect way more with the culture on a deeper level. And part of adapting to a new culture is knowing that you will never 100% belong and that it is okay. Like on my side, my English level is pretty good, but I know I'll always be an outsider when I'm in the US, even though I spend so much time trying to learn the culture. And I feel once you feel comfortable about that, that's when things get easier. And a big thing that will make you feel integrated, and something I see quite a lot of people struggle with when they move to France, is actually making friends and social relationships overall. Like a lot of people feel that French people can be a bit distant and cold, and that it is so hard to make friends. And if you want to know why, I've actually made a full video breakdown about this. And I think you should watch it next. I'll see you there.